But just to kind of go around, reintroduce ourselves. My name is Max Greenfield. I'm currently the pitching coach at Ardrey High School in Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent the last 2 years and currently still work as the recruiting coordinator for Santa Barbara City College. I was the assistant pitching coach and catching coach at Santa Barbara City College, where we were able to finish win our conference my second year, and also finish top 10 in ERA both years. So we've had a lot of success using methods that were implemented, hopefully, that we will get to discuss today. We're also joined by Dylan Drummey, the lead analyst for Kentucky's baseball program, also a writer at Pitcher List as well, and a writer at Prospects Live. And you just had a piece come out about basically stuff plus ERA, which was very fascinating. I hope we get to dive into that today as well. And Brandon Smith, who is a pitching coach at the Stevens Institute in New Jersey, a D3 institution, also works as the recruiting coordinator. So lots of background about pitching here and everything like that. Going to save the question that I had to kind of get us going in a second, but let's kind of just start off with like why you guys got into this kind of era of pitching development, and what fascinates it about you. What fascinates about it for you? So Dylan, why don't you lead us off?
Absolutely. So a big reason why I kind of started in this was because it was basically because I joined Kentucky, and a lot of what I was looking at beforehand was more strategy based and portfolio based of how to look at an assembly of a team, and that's not as applicable at the college level. And so I was introduced to the whole TrackMan suite of stats and all this stuff, and then started getting into savant data from that. But I kind of just started understanding more what we were looking for in a pitcher, how we were developing and leveraging the TrackMan data that we had at the time to actually create useful metrics and go off of that. So from there, it kind of, just delved into something that, became a little bit of an obsession, honestly, of just trying to figure out what I really liked and what I was trying to figure out, what we were trying to do. And also, just a lot of like Drivelines work and a lot of Kyle's work actually has, and a lot of what I've read has just inspired me to, go deeper into it and keep trying to build stuff.
Awesome. Brandon, what about yourself?
So I dove into it really while I was still playing. I caught all through high school, pitched just because in Little League I had the strongest arm, or one of the stronger arms. So kind of got thrown into everyday duty behind the plate with some pitching involved. And then when I got to junior college, really focusing on the pitching. I worked with a pitching coach a little bit at the end of high school and early into college. So I started learning some Tom House stuff, early NPA stuff. This is like 2015, 2016. So weighted ball holds, underload, overload balls. And then towards the middle of my college career, 2017, 2018, met a guy who played at my high school, played a little bit of professional baseball after college. And he trained at the old Florida Baseball Ranch, which is now the Florida Baseball Armory. So I was introduced to some skill acquisition stuff, more underload, overload training. And I just found it fascinating how different ideas were getting me better. And then stuff that worked for me didn't work for other guys. Stuff that worked for other guys didn't work for me. So, especially during the pandemic when things kind of shut down with baseball, like diving into this and trying to keep my career going while having limited resources, just trying to figure out the quickest way to get myself better, or the most efficient way to get myself better with a limited amount of equipment and space. And now on the coaching side, I'm using it. This is my first season in the college game. We actually just got we finished our first on-field scrimmage today. So I'm running straight from practice into this. But working on the private side for 3 years, and my last season as a high school pitching coach, just trying to blend it all together for guys and take everything that I've learned and try to throw out any biases that I have and make sure that each individual is getting better. So the prospect of pushing guys to where they want to be and past what they think they can be is something that really inspires me as a coach right now.
That's awesome. I really love what you said about seeing what works for you and versus other guys, and how that inspired you kind of to dig further. I mean, as you know, as a coach, like a large part of it is like that works for him, but doesn't work for you. And you have to kind of figure it out. And I find that process really fun. Kyle, thank you very much for joining us. My first kind of question to them was, what inspired you to kind of dig deep on this area of baseball development, pitching development? And, you are one of the biggest influences in modern pitching development there is. So what inspired you to go into this?
I'm old. I don't know if I can remember that long ago. Honestly, it was physical therapy, and it was rehabbing guys, keeping them healthy. I started coaching Little League and figured there had to be a better way to get players better, but more importantly, like keep them healthy. And honestly, it's honestly where it started. It didn't even start at all from a performance perspective, more just like how do we responsibly structure a throwing program and how do we train them. That was really all it was. Nice.
I mean, yeah, keeping guys healthy is, generally speaking, like, it's nice. It's good to do, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. As a guy who had a ton of arm injuries myself, it was like the thing for sure.
So Kyle, to kind of discuss the advancement we've made and the developments that we've had in pitching, we should kind of look back of where it started and the differences from, 15, 20 years ago that you were, talking about, coaching Little League, to what are the biggest differences now?
Biggest differences now is like, at the amateur side, I just got back from the Portland Northwest Baseball Conference. We do it every year. It's awesome. We're like a huge sponsor. And there's still a huge disconnect from the amateur, low-level amateur to college to pro. College and pro, I think, pretty close, at least from my experiences. Of course, there's pockets of pro and pockets of college that are behind. But overall, I think it's pretty good, which was not the case when I first started. But even on the high school side, it's still like really kind of behind in a lot of ways. And I've been a public high school coach, where you're paid $300 a year, but reality you're losing thousands of dollars. So I get it, but there still is quite a bit of disconnect between the Little League and the high school side of it compared to where they're going to go. And I think that's a pretty big concern of mine for sure.
And Brandon, you were a high school coach last year, so you can kind of speak to that. What did you see now in your job at Stevens Institute versus being a high school coach? I mean, what are kind of the differences in just the level of knowledge that people have, but also what resources you have?
So my high school was very lucky. A former teammate of mine in high school and in college, he came back to be the head coach at our alma mater, but he spent 3 years in Division I baseball. He bought his own Rapsodo 2.0 pitching. We had a Rapsodo 2.0 hitting from a local facility that we were giving lessons at. So our tech was pretty on par with the average college program, and our understanding was pretty solid from our we dove deep into it in 2020. A buddy of mine who's with the Tigers now bought a Rapsodo when he was home, and that's really where I first learned about it, just finding high school fields and trying to do on-the-fly pitch design, not really understanding stuff. But then when we used it with the high school guys, we had already been using it on the private side for a couple of years. So it's a seamless transition. We had guys that we've coached before on the private side that now we're just moving into a more formal setting with them. So we used it in tryouts to keep the metrics, to justify keeping or not keeping kids. And then we used it throughout the season as checkups, but also to make sure if we were working on something with somebody that we're moving in the right direction. So yeah, I think that our understanding is a little more on the new side of stuff rather than trying to fall back on what we knew as players. Because even in the almost 10 years that I've been out of high school, it's changed drastically what the development is and what's expected from these kids. Guys are playing. There's no more town travel, really. Guys are playing on these top tier organizations that are promising all of these things and giving them the facility time with the tech and stuff. So we knew that we needed to step our game up and make sure that we were matching what they could get on the private side. And
that's fascinating to hear about how you guys were able to replicate that, which is tough to do for a lot of high schools. I mean, just the resources available for a lot of them is not there. Dylan, kind of on the analyst side of things, modeling has taken a bigger impact in things now than even just 5 years ago, specifically in pitch design. How do you use this information to inform what you do with Kentucky, and role does data modeling have in your guys' player development?
Well, I mean, for starters, it's, there's a lot of data. I mean, now just relative to what there was, but, a big thing is, and a big aspect of it was kind of getting a lot of these. It's not necessarily like a forward answer for a lot of guys, but getting it down to less numbers for our coaches and maybe making it slightly easier for them to understand compared to what just the eye test happens to say about them was, a pretty, like, it's a contrary objective opinion that can work in favor for how we view guys and what pitches are actually working versus what they think is working. And so a lot of what we do when we look at stuff is, comparing some of those numbers of just, okay, that looked good. I can maybe talk to a hitter and say, okay, how did you see this guy in the box? Because I'm always curious how it compares. So I would like just, ask them, like, how do you feel about this dude? And they'll just tell me how they felt, like, in the box and how they were looking at it. And I'm like, okay, my model likes that. Like, my model says blah, 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 like after the fact, just as a sort of, kind of a test for me, just from a objective and subjective opinion on both ends, and figuring out from that point of, what seems to be working, what factors are working, but also through just mathematical testing going forward, seeing what the model actually likes within the given weights of, different pitches and different factors within said pitches, the break. And I mean, that just goes into the fact of also of treating, acknowledging, and while like there is a great, like, and we're understanding a lot from these types of models, also acknowledging their limitations, right? Like, we're farther. I mean, obviously there's so much more to do. Like, we can explain only so much, and we're trying, and a lot of people are trying, obviously, but, acknowledging it's helpful and maybe more objective and maybe more telling than the eye test, but, knowing it's not perfect.
Yeah, I mean, having an objective number, as you said, kind of just makes your argument better, right? Like, hey, you may see this, but the data says this, and we've got plenty of, sample size to it at this point, right? Like, it just has a better case. Kyle, can you kind of walk us through how, with the, Dylan brought up talking to the coaching staff and using the data models there, how being a coach, you kind of have to understand these data models a bit more and how you use those models with the Reds and at Driveline?
I think the important part, especially at scale when you're working in professional baseball, but also in college, is the coach that's like really caught up on Driveline Plus and Fangraphs and Baseball Reference and reads all of Eno's articles and everyone's articles, Max Bay and all these geniuses out there. I think that's not a great solution to scale. I mean, you have to think about the thousands and thousands of coaches out there, and expecting them all to read that kind of stuff is not probably in everyone's best interest. Additionally, it's like not everyone is really good with quantitative math, but that doesn't mean you can't help a player with tools. And so I think that's our job. And that's how I saw with my job with the Reds and now with the Red Sox, is how do you build the tools for these people to use? You have to think about like Subway, McDonald's, all these franchises that run, extremely, extremely well. Even the worst McDonald's you've been to and the best one, like, have the same items and are generally assembled correctly. So you have to, like, the systems that go into that are very, very important, expecting that every employee is going to be a genius and developed and motivated to learn all these esoteric things that ultimately don't make them a better coach. They really don't. If a tool can replace that side of it, like, that's what we should do, because it's really not about us being the smartest person, but it's about the players. And so I think the biggest shift we're seeing is not the nerds and the analytics and all these other buzzwords. I think a lot of it is the fact that, like, the coaching job of being a coach is harder than ever today. There's just more work to do. And I think there's a lot of pushback against that. So it's our job, to break it down to bullet points, is places like Driveline and then inside professional baseball and wherever you're at. If you send a player in or you're working with coaches and you have them do like a 200-hour certification course and you're trying to get them to get up to speed on every single thing, it's just not valuable. It's also not realistic. Like, how do we build tools that are easy to use and capture a huge amount of the value and go from there? And I think that's the next phase of where we got to go.
It's funny that you mentioned Max Bay. He's a very smart man, a good friend of mine. He told me once on our podcast that it's about explaining things in multiple levels of competency, and that making sure that you can explain a topic to somebody who has like a very basic understanding of it and someone who has a very elite understanding of it. I mean, as you said, like, it's not very feasible for coaches to spend 200 hours on it. So what are kind of the traits that coaches have that you can see that lead to you to think that they can explain these topics well, Kyle?
I'll answer with like just the evidence of who I hired. Two of the first people I hired with the Reds were Brian Conger and Brian Garman. So Conger is the pitching coordinator there now. He was my pitching coordinator too. And Brian Garman. And, they're both intelligent, so don't let them tell you otherwise. But they would definitely not, call themselves nerds or whatever. I guess the biggest thing that I knew, though, is that Brian Garman was coaching at a small NAI college, and, he was making a small amount of money. And he asked if he should buy the Rapsodo Insight camera, years and years and years ago. And it would have basically meant like a half of his salary, And so it's like the fact that I told him no, but it's just like the fact that these people do this, when you hire them, that when you give them resources, it's not like the Reds had infinite resources. We have nothing to complain about. They were very supportive. But that they're going to make it work, right? So when a lot of people hope, well, if I just had access to Edutronics, or I just had access to this, or just had access to a biomechanics lab, what were you doing before that? Were you able to make progress using, webcams and things like that? Were you able to make it work with limited technology? And that's, I think, the essence of what people didn't see with the Astros coming up in 2012 when I started there, going up from there, and seeing that evolution. And Colin Moran was hitting here at Driveline literally yesterday. And we were just talking about what it was like from him getting drafted by the Marlins to traded to the Astros and then traded to the Pirates, and just how crazy it was and how nuts it was to see the beginning of all that, and how hard the coaches worked. And he said that was the biggest difference between the organizations. It wasn't data or intelligence or whatever. Obviously, there was some difference. So, but the hitting coach is there at 10 in the morning for a 7 p.m. game in pro ball, at the minor league affiliate, and he's putting on blast sensors, syncing them, getting all the data in a spreadsheet. It was a lean operation there. And it was, people like Mike Fast made the tools, and Colin Wires, Pete Patillo, those guys did a great job making the things available. But they expect our coaches to work extremely hard, and I think that was the biggest separator.
10 o'clock to 7 o'clock. If you're listening to this and you want to get into pro ball coaching, just remember that part.
Yeah, if you don't like baseball.
If you don't like baseball, this is not for you.
Don't work for the Sigma Dal Astros, I guess.
Brandon, kind of wrapping that in of like the coaches, they don't have all the time in the world, but they do have to be smart and intelligent. But you're at, the D3 and the high school level. Models aren't readily available to you. So how do you kind of make it work with the limited information that you have? And do you try to use models to, inform your players and the rest of your coaches about, hey, like this works and we know this? As Dylan said, like objective data is good, makes your argument better. So how do you kind of incorporate that even when, you're at the high school or college level?
So Stevens, I'm very lucky. This is a high academic school known for engineering and emerging in quantitative finance. So we have a 4-man analytics team. It's run by a junior, Vaughn Weber, and he does a great job. He's there as much as he can with his class schedule. He's setting up the Rapsodo 3.0 for us. That's our tech of choice right now. We have the 3.0, so we had it on today for the scrimmage. So we're getting feedback instantly on the pitchers. We're getting stuff on the hitters when they hit the ball. We just got blast motion for every hitter. So our coaching staff might not necessarily have the technical skills, or certainly I can't code, so I don't rely on anything that I can do. But I can look at the Rapsodo and I can understand, okay, that was an okay pitch, or this is what we're moving in the right direction. But I lean on our analytics team. We have 3 students and then 1 volunteer non-student, and the non-student is going to be eventually designing some models in terms of plate discipline and pitch framing. We're going to get some cameras set up in center field for games and scrimmages. So I try to lean on those guys because that's their area of expertise, and they're a lot smarter than me at those things. So I'm not going to pretend like I can code, and we certainly don't have any models set up right now for pitches, but making sure that we're giving our guys the objective feedback because they're smart enough, they understand the numbers. So we're able to say, okay, you think you throw a 2-seam, well, this actually has more vertical break than horizontal break. You're throwing a bad 4-seam. Here's why you should scrap it. And they're very receptive to it, and they are able to look at it and understand it in a way that maybe is not always grasped on the high school level, where we're trying to not necessarily dumb it down, but water it down a little bit into digestible sizes for them.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as Kyle said, it's all about the players, right? You have to make sure that they can understand what they're doing. You know, the goal is to make them better, keep them healthy, make them good. Their success is why we're doing this, right? So as long as they can understand it, you know, it's good. Dylan, you know, as an analyst, I mean, part of player development is sometimes having hard conversations about, like, as Brandon just said, hey, you're throwing a 2-seam fastball that's just actually a dead zone 4-seam fastball. Like, we need to kind of change this. You know, how do you go about that conversation with the coaching staff and maybe the players about, hey, like, I'm just the analyst, but like, this is what we see. This is, you know, what we think you should do. How do you approach that conversation? You're muted, by the way.
Apologies, sorry, my bad. So a lot of what we do, basically, a lot of it is through the coaches. I mean, a lot of the data is absolutely, like, it's crucial in understanding, but, you know, also there's a lot of stuff that the hitters, rather just knowing the result of more, the coaches prioritize them knowing the result and actually the actionable change they need to make versus some of, you know, the information maybe behind it is just how we tend to approach it more of from in Kentucky. And so a lot of what I do is just informing more coaches in general. And sometimes there will be players that will come up to me and they'll be like curious about something and they'll text me and they'll be like, oh, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about this? There was a couple of pitchers who got drafted last year who still have texted me about stuff. And, but I think a big thing was, you know, knowing what I'm trying to also just say to the coaches in general from, okay, I think maybe this pitch in general, like if we can maybe cut that out or something, like there's guys that, you know, we know like he shouldn't touch that. If he can avoid it, possibly we should, because if he throws Y pitch instead of X, he's going to just be so much more successful. So I think just a big part is just being concise to coaches and being, you know, trying to isolate those crucial factors to where you're not overwhelming people with a lot of data and a lot of the information. Because like Kyle was saying, like these like coaches aren't, and a lot of them too, they don't want to read a lot of all the Sears articles and all the stuff that I like and nerd out about. And so it's unnecessary to them being better at their jobs, so that, you know, maybe that I can take that information that's in the background that I know of, boil it down to maybe something more simpler and have just an opinion to possibly give on a certain aspect of a pitch, or say maybe should we acquire someone from the transfer portal or something like that. And it can, you know, hopefully lead to some actionable insight that a coach wants to make. But, you know, it's really just, I mean, dependent on what the coaches want to use, what they want to do with that data, and what they want to do with the information.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for you too, because you don't want to overstep your boundaries, right? As you said, like filtering things through the coaches, you want to establish relationships with them and also make sure that the players are hearing the same thing from the same voices. Because if players hear one thing from you and another thing from a coach, that creates dysfunction, and that's bad. Like nobody wants that. So it's, you know, it's smart to always go through the coaching staff. We're going to take a little bit of a turn, just slightly, in the sense that biomechanics have become kind of the thing in pitching right now. You know, whether you have a knowledge of it or, you know, gaining that knowledge of it. Kyle, it's become a growing part of the process. How does this information help develop, you know, plans to train pitchers and make them better?
So when we first built the Biomech lab and had it working in production at Driveline, it still does output like, you know, a deck of like 13 pages with like kinematic graphs and everything. And you just think like, man, people are going to love this. Not saying it out loud. I don't know why I ever thought that. But you know, no one cares, right? And so what we had to do is like, okay, well then we have to train our coaches to be able to read these reports and turn them into biomechanists, and then they have them interpret it, which is what I think most people at the time were doing, not just in baseball, elsewhere. And then that, as I just said, that doesn't scale. So then we built automated tools using natural language processing. This is before OpenAI and GPT. Now we use those a ton, and it's way easier. But to summarize these things, come up with things, use AI and machine learning And so Anthony Brady, who now works for the Phillies, wrote a ton of those models. Now, basically, it's Kyle Wassenberger and Joe Marsh and me that do a lot of that work, and Gretchen Pouch, who crushes it as our operations manager. And so now we have all these tools and drills that say like grades. Here's 2080 scale. These drills have known to have these impact on these flags, and it's like a whole multi-model thing. So when I got a chance with the Reds, I was like, okay, we'll see who likes the output of like the raw output or the graphs versus the verified, like just the drills. They're called scores. Just the higher the number, the worse you are, and then modifies your throwing program as a result. And literally not a single person cared about the raw data, not even Joe Boyle, who I thought for sure would, because I've known Joe since, college, and, he's a huge nerd. And you see the glasses he wears when he pitches in the big leagues. But no, not even. So it's like, okay, you have to boil it down. And that means a lot of work for people like us to develop models and stuff like that. But you start with, if you know it, and because you didn't get a chance to build the model, and you just look at those graphs, then by the time you do develop the tools, the good point is that like you have deep knowledge yourself. So, it's huge. It was a huge factor in getting Carson Spires better, getting him to the big leagues. It was a huge factor in developing people like Stevie Branch, speaking of people, Northeast, in our non-drafted free agent class. They were non-drafted for a reason for the majority of them, and so they needed to get a lot better. So those tools were extremely, extremely helpful in giving them clarity, because they're older players. They're typically 21 at the youngest and 23 at the oldest. They don't have a long leash. So you have to get them better fast. Or a men's league catcher we literally signed, and then a year and a half later he was pitching in the fall league, which was awesome. So it's like those tools really help give them a very clear path, because they don't have a lot of time. And that's what you really got to respect about the college and the pro player's career, is it doesn't last very long.
Yeah, it's a fight against time. What's the saying? Father Time remains undefeated. So you can never beat time. Dylan, kind of on a related topic with biomechanic data, I don't know if Kentucky has one. I'm sure if they don't, you would love one. But what kind of, you take that data, if you've ever worked with it, and how does that sort of, inform the plans that you can help create as an analyst, and the plans that you can help your coaches make, for your players?
So I'll admit it has been somewhat limited. We do not currently have a system in place that measures biomechanical data or the cameras. It was just, something that wasn't in the budget for us. And I would love one, but, there's also a lot of other things I'd like. And, so it honestly, and I don't personally think that I'd probably be the best person to speak thoroughly on this. I do think it's the work that I've read regarding that topic, and a lot of just what Driveline and stuff like, and people like that, and Tread and all the stuff that they've been producing. It's absolutely crucial in understanding. And from there, I think, biomechanical data, and then, from there, you think neuroscience, and then just go forward and forward and forward, and then just keep trying to figure out what's the next step. I think, with how much, and from the conversations I was able to have at some of the winter meetings too, it's everything right now. Like understanding that, being able to use that data and utilize it properly to make the correct decisions in evaluating players, but also, being more predictive of things like injuries and stuff like that. I wrote a lot about, just teams that were faced with ineffective spending. And one of those is teams that are subject to higher injury risk than others. And there is some variance between teams, albeit it's not a clear advantage between one team versus the next. But if a team as a whole could somehow limit injuries, the amount of value that would bring just as a whole, or even be able to predict even a slightly declining performance to some extent based on biomechanical data, it'd be huge for the amount that teams could save, and then therefore optimize their payrolls. So I'm sorry I can't speak more deeply regarding just, the programs and stuff like that. But, the actual utilization has just so many more larger macro effects than I think some people realize.
Completely agree. I think it was clear that when the Tampa Bay Rays are trying to be early adapters of this, and they're known for not exactly spending a lot of money on payroll, they probably feel that in the long run, they can save money by just their ability to continue to develop pitchers. And they just traded Tyler Glass now, and they're probably not going to see a drop off from it because they're the Tampa Bay Rays. That's what they do. But Brendan, in layman's terms, I mean, biomechanics is essentially just you're trying to understand how pitchers move and what they do well and what they don't. That's still like a good coach can still see things with their eyes and everything. So walk us through like what you're trying to pay attention to and how a pitcher moves and what you think correlates well to things in their catch play, things in their plyos, drills that you're trying to do that help lead to more efficient movement.
So going back to the biomechanical stuff, we are in the market for it. If anybody has cheap biomechanics labs, come to Hoboken, please. But I mean, we've looked into the biomechanical stuff. I know that there's a professor on campus who has a partnership with MLB, and she's run some tests before, and our guys have been part of it, but I don't know how recent that's been or if it's going to pick up again. It is something that I'm interested in, but again, resources are limited, unfortunately, in a college budget. In terms of what I look for, I really try to understand why guys are doing certain movements. I don't want to, especially I got hired in the middle of the first semester, end of the fall. So I didn't want to come in guns blazing. I have my ideas and guys have been doing their stuff. And obviously they're successful if they're playing past high school. So who am I to come in and start trying to change things right away? Leaning into guys' motor preferences. Devin Hayes and Rob Blanc are two great guys on Twitter and Instagram that have dove into this stuff in terms of we can't really force a guy into movement if his body is not predisposed to that movement. So if we're asking a guy with a very good hip internal rotation to coil, it's not necessarily going to translate to success on the mound. So trying to understand where guys are coming from and, if they have a private pitching coach that I'm familiar with and I kind of understand why they're doing the movements that they're doing, and then just gradually trying to input my opinion about certain things. I have ideas that I think work for some guys, but just because I say something doesn't mean that my team needs to take it as gospel. I tell our staff almost daily that they have a voice and they're allowed to disagree with me respectfully, as long as they're willing to have a discussion about it. And then when I tell guys to make a change, I need them to ask me why. If I can't defend it, then I'm just kind of saying stuff because I've heard it somewhere and it's been repeated to me. And really what I'm trying to avoid is cueing guys. So I just came out with drill protocol for all my guys. What I think works, a lot of stuff I've taken from Florida Baseball Armory, Connected Performance, Drive Line, Tread, just basically any public resource that has drills out there. And I try to bucket guys into their motor preferences and give them their drills based off of that. So whether we're trying to really enhance something or try to fix something, not necessarily fix, but enhance something, because fix is implying that somebody's broken. And unless these guys are injured, none of them are really broken. So making sure that I understand why a person is making a certain movement or what they've been taught in the past. My favorite people to work with are guys that think that they're shortstops and then come to us and pitch, because they're usually the best athletes on the field from a young age. And if we're trying to make movement changes, it's happening pretty quickly. I won't pretend to be a biomechanical expert. So when these guys have questions, I'm trying to keep it to a level that both of us can understand.
Pitchers are athletes, damn it. Pitchers are athletes. I like what you said there about players asking questions. Why? I think that's so important to success for everybody. If I can't defend what I'm telling my players, then I shouldn't be telling them that. If I can't go out there and say, I think you need to, coil a bit more because I know that you rotate well that way and you're not doing it well right now, that's fine. But if I just say, hey, you should change your foot just because I said so, nobody's really benefiting from that. How important, you're talking about movements down the mound and trying to make changes. How important is seeing them lift and run and sprint, doing all that stuff? Because some guys, you watch them lift and you watch them run and you're like, wow, that's a phenomenal athlete. And then they go to the mound and you're like, wow, that's not at all the same person. So how important is that to you?
I think that having discussions with the strength coach, which we are very lucky to have a full-time strength coach that oversees our team and other teams, but we're very lucky to have him work with our guys. So having discussions with the strength coach and athletic trainers, making sure first off that there's no injuries or limitations for guys. And then number two, seeing their movements. And our strength coach has done a great job of keeping us updated. He sent us his document with all their max day data, their squat, their bench. We tested 5-10-5s and vertical jumps. So for example, we have a guy, his vert is a 38, and he just got on the mound for his first bullpen and didn't throw a fastball under 89, up to 92 for the first time in his life. Like, that guy is a freak athlete, probably a better athlete than most Division III pitchers out there. And that's a guy, basically my job is not to screw up and not to make less athletic. So making sure that we're balancing the workload, and also all of his daily work is embracing and enhancing that athleticism. So having that data for me is great, because I'm able to see, all right, maybe this guy isn't the most athletic, and it's going to be harder for him to make this massive change that I'm asking him to make. So being able to take that data and then basically scale my projects with them down. Like if the guy with a 38-inch vert, all of a sudden he just decides to basically take a 10-foot leap down the mound and try to throw, I can say, hey, you're too athletic to sacrifice that. Like, we need to scale that back a little bit. But if I'm asking a non-athlete or one of the lesser athletes on my staff to make these crazy changes, I need to understand that, one, that move is not going to be made in a vacuum, and it's going to affect every other part of the delivery. But two, it might take longer for them, because the athleticism and the proprioception, body awareness is not 100% there as it is with the elite of the elite athletes.
Yeah, I like what you just said about, if you make one change, you have to expect a change in somewhere else. Kyle, how often have you seen that with athletes that you've worked with, pitchers, that you have this data, biomechanical data, that says, hey, they're not doing this well, so you try to make the change, and then something else changes, and your coaching staff is again back on like, all right, well, we tried this and that didn't work. And so where does it become we're just looking too deep into the data, and we need to just focus on, like, what does he do well and try to improve that?
Yeah, it's again with the pro. It's college too. You only have a few years, One of the biggest things is the work in the weight room, which we call high performance. Our models are able to predict bat speed within, like, I think plus or minus 2 miles per hour, and throwing velocity within plus or minus 3 point something miles per hour in a large distribution, without ever seeing the mechanics of them swing or throw. Obviously, there's huge discrepancies and outliers you can point to in a million different ways, but it just proves that force output is very predictive if you have the right models, which kind of gets me to the other point, is what you brought up about the biomechanics lab. They're insanely expensive, and they just can't be. Like, this is not, it's not useful. Like, there's got to be a single camera solution is fine. Pitch AI and things will get you decent information, but there has to be a way to use 2 or 3 cameras. I mean, the technology's out there. 15 years ago, I was using 2 Casio cameras and getting data, but it just takes forever to do the classification. So that's where I think there's a huge opportunity to improve the industry, and something that I hope that we're going to look into. But again, that's a big breakthrough that we can see at the college level, because just like we saw when PitchFX was released accidentally open source, and how it changed people like Dan Fox and Mike Fass and others that helped their career, but it really helped pitchers nationwide. And so being able to have some sort of open source thing, yes, it's good for the community, and there's no doubt about it, but additionally it's going to be much better for the pitchers, because I think we'd be very arrogant to believe that the smartest people work in professional baseball or drive. It seems very unlikely that all the best people are currently captured or even want to be, right? So I think we have to do it as a community. I'm like yelling at myself at this point, but there's definitely something we need to do, because there's tons of pitching coaches out there that would love to know more, that either don't have the money, and again, they're not supposed to be physicists or biomechanists. They're supposed to be getting pitchers better. So to tie it back to the original question, how do we keep the main thing while understanding that these players have limited resources? And it's definitely one of the most annoying things to me right now, is that there's no doubt the step between the worst biomechanics lab that's acceptable and nothing is like massive, right? The worst biomechanics lab that's acceptable still is $100,000. right? So it's like not a good spot for us to be in. So yeah, a little bit of a soapbox, but I've seen what it can do for players. So being able to do that, so we can do things to be surgical about their career and not change one thing, which changes a million things. I mean, that's what a biomechanics lab allows you to do. It allows you to make more surgical decisions without impacting other things. That plus AI is what it allows it to do, and that it's really good for players.
Yeah, the benefit of being able to change something without affecting something else, and so that way you know that the targeted root of the problem is getting fixed, and you're not worried about other symptoms coming up, is very, very valuable. Dylan, something that we can see is sometimes, as we said, guys will make changes, and then all of a sudden that affects their pitches. Like we noticed, guy makes a change, all of a sudden he's not getting behind the ball. All of a sudden the IVB on his fastball is dropping. We have models that, we have Stuff Plus, as you created it as well. Like, how can you see as an analyst, like, hey, we're making physical changes and their stuff is getting worse? Can you kind of walk us through what your model of Stuff Plus values and what Stuff Plus models value in general, and how like the changes don't always appear voluntary, or can always just be they're not as easy to fix?
Absolutely. So that's first of all, I think it's really, really important to not view any of the relationships as exactly linear when you're putting them together. Models, a lot of these models and a lot of the models that I create, whether that's, dependent pitch models or independent pitch models, they are, based on machine learning. And a lot of it is using a lot of, advanced algorithms that are going through the different factors and weighting based on certain elements and a certain perspective at a certain point, whether it's working. So I think that's crucial to first start off with that. So it's not linear. And I think a big thing when I'm looking at that and what we're looking at is, trying to isolate those factors maybe as much as possible to maybe make it more of a linear relationship to where we can kind of get a more like single, so that we can make it almost linear. And that we're almost trying to, say, holding everything else constant for what someone's doing. If he had X amount of IBB, or if he was doing this on his given pitches, this is what he was doing at a given point that could maybe isolate it and then make it more effective. As far as what my models value specifically, again, so a lot of them are based, like how they're measured is what they weigh accordingly. So it's dependent on, what actually it's dependent, like, so a lot of mine adjust for the actual pitch type, but it's really just dependent too on, like, Arsenal Plus is very dependent on how a pitch maybe plays off, the difference that is from a past pitch that we utilize. And that's kind of where a dependent model comes in, is that you're using the speed difference and then, rate and, just taking factors to, normalize that and make it more even. Specific factors that I really look at, it's a load of different things. A lot of it is just the different angles of acceleration and different angles of velocity, release position, velo, obviously, spin axis, stuff like that. It's a whole thing. And then there's a couple of other things that I've just, added in there myself that have been either adjustments and then, that are measured for multicollinearity to try to avoid that. So it's definitely a lot of just, different aspects that are just related to how the ball is being released, how it's being seen. We're trying to best quantify, how a hitter is actually seeing the ball, because that's ultimately what Stuff Plus is trying to answer. And so it's not necessary, and that's not a simple question. Like, they can say what they saw, but like, and putting it in quantitative terms in an objective formulation, it's not as, straightforward. But it's definitely an interesting relationship. And I think a lot of too is just, whether you're evaluating stuff and then the stuff's relationship with the location, which a lot of my research has, found that, like, the amount of noise and just, a lot of the location metrics and what you're evaluating is insane. Like, you're not getting a lot of signal just compared to what's actually predictive, what's not predictive of future performance, and what you're looking into. And that's what I've been trying to, dive into. A lot of my metrics and a lot of what I've been researching is, the actual impacts of different stuff elements and testing certain weighted factors and what data we're using and how I specifically go about that. And, that's just going forward with that, I think is really, really crucial in optimizing the methodology behind certain machine learning models and what's actually being utilized as a model compared to, something that's setting a standard and then not adjusting. There's a lot of different ways that people go about things. So finding the right ways to machine learn, to actually model the problems correctly with the correct variables, but also utilizing the correct models in themselves. And then, using artificial intelligence and other factors to truly, reach its full potential. We're a long way from there. I think it's coming, but, it's not where I want it to be.
Eventually, one day, everything will be A-okay, right? That's what we say. Brandon, there's somebody out there who might be listening to this who's going like, why should I care about any of this? Pitchers used to throw 250 innings a year and nobody ever complained. Nobody ever got hurt or anything like that. Why should we care? Like, why are we improving at this? And why is it better now than before?
At pitching development specifically?
Yeah, at pitching development specifically.
Well, think about all the cool stories that we get because of the advancements that we've made. Personally, I know Kyle talked about the men's league catcher that he signed and converted to a pitcher. I played with that kid's little brother. That whole family's life, it changed. Like, all of a sudden, now the little brother dove into pitching development. He's at his second Division I school with a chance to get drafted because he's throwing harder because of the stuff that he learned from his brother and the buy-in that his brother helped him create, because his brother got so much better at pitching in such a short amount of time. And now the little brother wants to live up to the big brother. How many guys have we heard of? Rich Hill takes a stint in indie ball and comes back, and Brian Bannister, who gave an unbelievable seminar at the ADCA that I was at earlier in the month, taking some of that public data and changing Rich Hill's career, and he's still pitching after a long stint in indie ball and years of being a so-so major league pitcher, which is still better than just about anybody else in the world. So if you care about people, you should care about pitching development, because we get cool stories, but also think about the high school kid that maybe is on the borderline of making the JV team and the varsity team. For example, I worked with a kid. He was a borderline JV varsity guy as a junior, got stronger in the weight room. We were able to put him on the hitting Rapsodo, so we got some objective feedback with swing changes. All of a sudden, that kid's playing Division III baseball now. He went from a borderline cut to playing JV as a junior to 2.5 years later, he's on a Division III roster and he has a chance to play 4 more years of baseball. So again, I'll steer it back towards the people, because pitching development is also human development. We got to understand that guys have lives outside of the field. They have families, that their lives can change for the better. There are kids that are going to college because they can throw a ball hard or they can throw it weird. And maybe they're the first person in their family to go to college, or that college degree is gonna change how much money they're gonna make one day, or they go into college and they meet people that they're gonna be friends with forever. Like I'm still in touch with my college teammates. I'm in touch with guys that I played in indie ball with. Like, the relationships that we're making the further you play, and it's life changing. But then also, improving pitching development is giving more guys a chance to play for a long time.
That's an absolutely awesome story that the little brother, by the way. That's so cool. Like, that's such a fun way to
shout out to the Tipinelli family.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. But yeah, I completely agree. Like, I think one of the most rewarding experiences for me is, and I just got a text from him today, so maybe that's why it popped in my head. We had a freshman at Santa Barbara City College my first year that was topping 81 miles an hour, but he threw a ton of strikes. And at the junior college level, like, strikes play. Like, at the junior college level, strikes get outs, man. Like, and he just threw a ton of strikes. And we weren't really sure where we were at post-COVID and everything. And we kind of came up to him with an offer, and we said, hey, like, you got a chance to either pitch maybe 5 to 10 innings, which we can't even guarantee, or you got the chance to take, basically the entire semester, the entire season, and we'll work on throwing harder, because that's what you need. And he decided on option 2. And today he just texted me like, hey, I just went 4 shutout innings with a couple of strikeouts, no walks, and was 85 to 87. You know, he hit 89 in season last year and was our best pitcher. And hopefully he's going to go to a Division I school. He changed his life. Like, he's now gone from a guy who's like, oh yeah, he just plays baseball and has fun, to a guy who might make money at the Division I level. Like, that's, I mean, such an awesome story. He's also a great kid. And if he ever does listen to this, Jake, you're a great kid. So keep it up. My last question for everybody here is, we've kind of hinted at it throughout, but like, Kyle, I'll start with you. Where does pitching development go from here?
I mean, there's still just a ton of place to go. You know, the stuff and being able to develop command is something we've done a pretty good job of lately. We haven't written a lot about it. We have some proprietary stuff going on. But it's definitely the biggest area now. Like, the constant just like throw things down the middle, the highest stuff value is definitely still valuable. But I think people are joking themselves if they think that the hitters are just never going to adjust to this, or that the league's not going to change the ball or something like that, right? So there's got to be a better way to develop command more methodically, you know, whether it's intended zones or tracking it more quantitatively. There's got to be a better way, because right now the game is tolerating walks, I think, to too high of a degree. And I think that leads to a less interesting product, which I think the league rightfully cares about, entertainment, you know, but from I think there's a big whiplash. If hitters learn to take sliders, I think that's pretty bad for pitchers. So I think being able to quantitatively train command is something everyone should be thinking about.
Swings and misses in the strike zone. Very important. Very important. Brandon, what about you?
I'd say, I mean, a lot of the topics that we talked about could be the future. There's a ton of different directions that we can go. One thing I would want to see is trying to get everybody on the same page or similar pages. A lot of noise, especially for younger kids with access to TikTok or Twitter or Instagram. All these coaches that are throwing out, this is the reason you don't throw hard, or you need to do this to throw 95. But I think that AI is going to play a big role in future pitcher development. I think that we're just scratching the surface. I know that Driveline uses a ton of stuff with AI, and I think that it's going to evolve past just writing models or filling in the blanks on the tech side. I think that it could eventually creep into the old school pitching development, pitching coaches that are giving cues and stuff. AI could either enhance the way that we talk to players, or it could entirely take things out. So I think that as a society, we're just scratching the surfaces of AI. And I think that especially on the pitching side, we're just beginning to see AI leak into our pitching development.
Nice. Dylan, what about you?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of places to go. Most of what I've been focusing on lately is modeling. And I think there's a lot of improvement that can be done there, just in terms of the actual modeling in itself, and just, you know, the statistical math behind actual machine learning models and stuff like that. And then just, you know, companies coming up with advancements and how we're going about that, how we're automating that, and then making it possibly more efficient, developing more accurate models. So that's one thing. Obviously, you know, the biomechanics stuff and the AI, like, you know, I know those are buzzwords, right? Like, I mean, it's true. But like, you know, they're buzzwords, but I think it's just really, really crucial. Like Kyle was saying, it's accessibility. Like, we're on a frontier, but, you know, when you have a minimum threshold that you're running at about $100,000 and it's not accessible to everyone, it's really hard to be a frontier when it's just barely anybody on it. And so making that more accessible, I think, is absolutely key to advancing people as a whole. I mean, I know there are major D1 programs that obviously can't afford biomechanical type of information and data. And it's, you know, so this is next, but, you know, it's still happening. Like, it's still happening in teams. I know, even talking to them, they're like, yeah, we're still learning this stuff too. And obviously Kyle made a lot of, you know, just advancements and stuff like that, but, you know, we're still there. We're still doing that. And I think from there, like, if you really had to go a step ahead, it'd be neuroscience based. And I've read some stuff about that, of just, you know, utilizing neuroscience to optimize performance and whatnot. But yeah, it's a lot. There's a whole bunch. I mean, obviously, you know, the more you start to learn about baseball, right, the more you realize we don't know. So
I like what you said about neuroscience, because I mean, if you could find out people can handle pressure and like the ability or traits or the level they can handle it, I mean, gosh, the New York Yankees are going to be all over that of who can handle New York. Next thing you know, they don't have the WFAN, radio guys in their ears all the time saying like, that guy can't handle New York. Whereas now we're kind of like, well, we won't know until he doesn't. But yeah, I mean, I think, just my personal opinion, I would love to see, I think we're seeing it already with people talking about the increase in potential splitter usage, and sinkers were like a positive run value pitch for the first time by Savant. And I think that's because we've just gotten so good at pitch design, and we've gotten so good at knowing who should throw sinkers and who shouldn't. So the amount of guys who are throwing bad sinkers is just going down. Like, just in my opinion. So I think we're going to see improvement in the changeup space, a better understanding. You hear a lot of, oh, it's such a feel pitch, right? Like, you have to be some guys like, I don't feel it today, like, so I can't throw it. And when you have limited resources, I mean, that's, Brandon, you can speak to that. It's like, yeah, it's kind of true. Like, you can't kind of tell a guy like, hey, throw it like this and it'll work every time. Or for the most part, like, we've kind of got breaking balls down to a science, but with changeups, it's a little bit harder. I think that's where we kind of see an improvement moving forward.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't get an edgertronic in there. We can't see the finer points of the release. So changeups have become more of a feel thing. And, we have guys that'll say, oh, yeah, I really felt good on that changeup, or just make like adjusting grips. Sometimes it could be as simple as that, or where they're putting the pressure on the ball.
Finger pressure on the baseball, I think, is I would love to get data on that, just to see, like, if I knew exactly where I could put, the pressure on my middle finger or the pressure on my thumb, and know exactly the type of movement it would create.
No free plugs, but Pitch Logic. I had a very interesting conversation with their CTO at the ABCA, but they, in their new technology, shows where the pressure is coming from on release. When they're spinning the ball. So it's popping up right there on their screen. They're showing, it takes away the entire finger, and it just shows which part of the finger is last on the ball and where it's putting the pressure on the ball.
Again, if you have access to that kind of information, that changes how you can approach pitch design. I want to thank all of you for joining me. Dylan, keep up the great work. You're the youngest one here, so but hold on, we did actually get a question from Nate Schwartz. I know there's lots of splitter discourse recently. Do you guys see them making more of a breakthrough in the US and players actively seeking them out as both the pro and college level? I think so.
I think the more that I think basically right now, guys don't see splitters. So if you have a good one, it's going to take a little bit for guys to adjust.
It's also like there's the myth around like, oh, it's hard on your arm. That's never actually been proven, right? Like, I've never. Kyle, have you ever seen tangible research about splitters being difficult on arms? I haven't.
No, not to take too much time, but with the current biomechanical modeling, it is going to be very difficult to tell if any pitch type is worse for arms, because of just how we model the arm is not very detailed, so we need to do something like forward dynamics and like actual measurement of the muscle activity. And then I think if we do that, which is Driveline we've been doing it for 10 years. So, it's not done. Just been working on it for 10 years. We're almost done. Probably not. Once that's done, I think it would solve a lot of problems. I mean, that's how you make prosthetic legs and things like that, like EMG activity of the lower half. There's a lot of money in gates and things like that. It's just that there's not much for the upper body, so it's definitely possible, and it makes it much more precise. But we need to get there. But long story short, there's really no evidence, but people should throw splitters.
Yes, Dylan. What about yourself? Are you on the splitter trend?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I got to see Hurston Waldrop pitch last year. God knows how he went. After 20, and that was one of the nastiest pitches I've ever seen. I talked to guys, they're like, what did we just see? Like, you could see like they were seeing.
I was live tweeting that. It's such a terrible Yeah, how did the Braves get him? I honestly thought he was going to go top 10. I thought he was going to go top 10. It's ridiculous.
When he went to Atlanta, I was just like, I was so mad. I was like, of course, a smart team.
Not only does he go to Atlanta, he goes under slot.
Exactly. I was so mad.
I was at the draft because this is Seattle. I was there, and I was like, "You gotta be kidding me."
All right, when people were just like, "Yeah, Waldrop's falling," and I was like, "Why?" Splitters are good, people. You should throw splitters. Thank you guys for joining me very much, Dylan. You got a bright career ahead of you. Keep it up. I'll be following Kentucky. I don't know if you were there while Alonzo Rubalcaba was there, but he's an SBCC grad. He might. Were you there while he was there?
I honestly probably not.
Okay.
I don't graduate for a year or so.
Okay, then yeah, you might have just missed him. But the SBCC guy that went to Kentucky. Brandon, I wish you and Stevens Institute a bunch of success. Your guys' season should be starting relatively soon, right?
Super Bowl Sunday.
Oh, gee. That kind of sucks. I'm sorry.
We have a turf field, so
well,
kind of a rarity in the Northeast, but we're going to get out there earlier than everybody else, and hopefully it gives us an advantage.
Well, you're clearly a bright mind and a well thought out pitching coach. I assume that the staff will be good, and I wish you continued success. Kyle, this is always absolute pleasure to learn from you and speak to you. And Driveline continues to do great work, and I will continue to learn from you and the company, and we'll try to do everything I can to make my pitchers better following the methods that you guys have championed.